As composer Michael Harrison studied classical Indian singing, he noticed that his piano started to sound more and more out of tune. He had this piano checked and retuned multiple times, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong. Now, Indian classical music uses a complex system of pure harmonic ratios that are not found in modern Western music, and especially not on the notes of the piano. What are these pure harmonic ratios, and why are they not in our music? To answer these questions, I need to explain a little about the physics of vibration, and I apologize, I'll have to use a little bit of math, but I promise I'll make it worth your while. After establishing this background, I will explain what just intonation is and how it's different from the notes we use on pianos today. I'll tell you about the loss of harmonic purity, a loss gone unnoticed by many, and then I'll tell you about an exciting new movement of contemporary musicians and composers like Michael Harrison who are trying to restore these pure intervals to our music. The frequency of a sound measured in hertz and the pitch of a note we hear have a logarithmic relationship. When you double the frequency of a note, it goes up an octave, and when you divide it by 2, it goes down an octave. So if, for instance, the frequency of middle C is 200 hertz, then the frequency of the C below it is 100, and the C above is 400, and so on. But what happens if you multiply a frequency by 3 or 5? I'll explain this in a bit, but first I'll explain what harmonics are. A vibrating string or column of air actually vibrates in multiple ways at once. The note that we hear actually has a whole series of higher notes inside it that give it its distinct sound. These higher notes are called the overtone series, and the fundamental and the overtones make up a whole set called the harmonic series. Most of the time you can't hear these overtones on their own, but there are ways to isolate these notes. In overtone singing, for instance, a singer changes the shape of their mouth to make one of these overtones really ring. On string instruments, putting your finger lightly on the string at exact fractions of the string length also isolates one of these harmonics. So back to this diagram. As you hear me play the harmonics on the cello, follow along with the diagram and listen to what happens to the distance between the harmonics as they get higher. I've colored the prime numbered harmonics. The non-prime harmonics are either octaves or combinations of these prime ones. The fractions here represent that harmonic's frequency ratio. When you multiply the fundamental's frequency by 3/1, for instance, you get the frequency of the third harmonic, 300 hertz. Let's zoom in on one octave. You have the fundamental note on the left. When you multiply its frequency by 2, you get the note on the right, or the second harmonic, just an octave higher. The third harmonic is over an octave higher, like we can see in this diagram. But then we can take that note and divide it by 2 to bring it back into the same octave as the fundamental. This is the same as multiplying the fundamental by 3/2. You can do the same thing to each prime harmonic to get them all into the same octave, and here's what that looks like. Before I explain how to build a major scale using these harmonics, I need to switch to a new type of diagram. So this is one octave of a piano keyboard wrapped around a circle. It starts at C at the top, goes clockwise to D, E, F, etc., and wraps back around to C. Here's what that last diagram of prime harmonic ratios looks like in this format. Around the year 100 AD, a Greco-Roman philosopher and mathematician named Claudius Ptolemy developed a scale based on the third and fifth harmonics. Most of the time, when something is said to be in just intonation, it's this tuning system we're referring to. Here's how it's constructed from harmonic ratios. So we start with C, we go up or down a series of third and fifth harmonic ratios to make a major scale. Here's what the scale sounds like in order. This is a major scale in just intonation. By contrast, the keys of a piano are tuned to 12-tone equal temperament. This means that all the 12 notes of an octave are the same distance apart. In order to do this, to divide an octave into 12 equal parts, Instead of multiplying a starting frequency by whole number ratios, you need to multiply by 2 to the power of some fraction of 12. And that's probably way more math than you bargained for. Here's what this looks like. You can see here that the notes of an equal tempered piano sort of line up to these harmonic ratios, but especially the distance between C and E, which is called a major third because it's the third note of a major scale, is too wide. Pianos do not play major thirds in tune. When notes in a chord are related by a whole number ratio, our brains recognize the sound as more pure and more pleasing to listen to. In just intonation, the frequencies of the notes in a chord will lock together and will have a very calm sound. But because 12-tone equal temperament doesn't use any pure harmonic ratios, the frequencies of the notes interfere with one another and you hear a beating effect. Here's a comparison of how a C major scale sounds in both types of tuning. It's kind of subtle, so it helps to wear headphones, but listen for that beating effect. Starting with the equal temperament, how modern pianos sound. And here's the same scale in just intonation. So why would we use a system that's out of tune? A big advantage of equal temperament is that music sounds the same no matter what key you play in, which basically means what note you start on. If you were to tune a piano to just intonation to C, music sounds much better, but only in the key of C. To demonstrate this, here's a digital keyboard tuned in just intonation to C. Here's a C major chord. But here's what it sounds like if you play a D major chord on the same keyboard, justly tuned to C. And you can see that this sounds worse than equal temperament, and especially this interval here. Not pretty. If you want to be in tune in all 12 keys and to be in perfect just intonation, you would need to use a lot more notes. Starting from the notes of Ptolemy's system plus the rest of the half steps, here's all the notes you would need. So if you wanted to use just intonation, you would either have to retune your piano every time you wanted to change keys, or use a piano with 35 unequally spaced notes per octave. Historically, there were many different solutions to this problem of tuning. These involved various combinations of two main options: compromise the purity of pitch, like what happens with equal temperament, or use more complex systems with more notes, like the one I just showed you here. Many of these different tunings and temperaments coexisted throughout history, but as music became more complex in the classical era, composers needed a way to standardize tuning, and especially for keyboard instruments, which used fixed pitches for each note. It's unclear when it developed, but 12-tone equal temperament gradually overtook all other tuning systems, and especially the complexities of just intonation. Almost all music we hear today is in 12-tone equal temperament. By the 20th century, equal temperament became so universal in the Western world that just intonation and other systems were relegated to musical history textbooks. At this point, not only was just intonation more complicated, it was mostly forgotten. A small group of composers set out to reclaim tonality by tackling the complexity of just intonation. In the mid-20th century, American avant-garde composer Harry Partch constructed new instruments to play in pure ratios. Composer Ben Johnston studied with Partch early on in his career, then went on to develop his own system of notation for harmonic ratios. Here's the basics of Johnston's system. Johnston's music notation is built on existing structures. The notes of a C major chord are assigned the same values as Ptolemy's just intonation scale we constructed earlier. And in the first two lines of this chart, his usage of sharps, flats, pluses, and minuses is similar to mean tone temperament, a form of tuning in the Renaissance and medieval periods. But everything we've looked at so far only uses the first two prime harmonics, 3 and 5. What about the other colors? So that's where the rest of the chart comes in. Johnston helped pioneer what is called extended just intonation. As if the potentially infinite notes of normal just intonation weren't enough, he wrote music that uses up to the 7th, 11th, and 13th harmonics, and occasionally even more. These higher harmonic ratios can create some pretty strange sounds since they often fall between the notes of a piano, but the pure whole number ratios of just intonation give even strange chords a type of purity. Now, if you're seeing this and thinking it might be really complicated to play, you'd be right. Ben Jonson's String Quartet Number 7, which has over 1,000 pitches per octave, is known to the classical world as the hardest string quartet ever written. Here's my favorite section from this quartet. A quick disclaimer first, though. This music is written for the purpose of exploration and expression and might sound a little jarring at first. But keep an open mind and listen for new sounds that don't fit within the notes of a piano. And especially pay attention to the glissando sections where all four musicians play in perfect lockstep as they slide between notes. Especially given how difficult this music can be. The question you may be asking now is, why? For me, at least, I love listening to music in just intonation and extended just intonation. When I hear a chord that I've never heard before with a certain purity that I can't really explain, it's just breathtaking. To explain why he composes in extended just intonation, Ben Jonson himself says, "The extreme complexity of contemporary life can be reconciled with the simplifying and clarifying influences of systems of order based upon ratio scales. Art can help us by making intelligible the complex patterns of the tensions of modern life. To extend musical order further into the jungle of randomness and complexity, that is perhaps the fundamental aim of contemporary serious music." I've felt oddly comforted as I've listened to this music. It has this complexity, but this paradoxical simplicity that has helped me make sense of some of the complexity in my life. I'm happy to report that Michael Harrison retuned his piano. Here's an excerpt from his album for piano in extended just intonation called Revelation. Rather than settling for what's familiar, let's allow pure harmonic ratios to show us the beauty of physics and mathematics, restore the purity of historic tunings, and explore new musical sounds. Music has the power to heal, to transform, to transport us to other worlds. As we adapt to a complex world, let's allow our music to adapt as well. Thank you.